create social networks. In the Great Depression, one of the things that allowed families to survive was because of women's networks among relatives and family members and also friends. People moved in with each other when they couldn't afford a rent. People watched another person's child because the woman had to go to work. People brought over food when they knew someone was unemployed. Those networks are very frayed at this point and disappearing, as 3/4 of U.S. women now work outside of the home. And after women now work outside of the home, they come home to what Arlie Hochschild called a second shift of emotional and domestic labor. 60% of women with children under 2 are in the paid labor force. Women with children under 1 year old work full-time, twice as much as they work part-time. Almost 80% of women with children from 6 to 11 are in the labor force. And because there's no governmental support for American working mothers, 85% of children are in substandard child care. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means if they're under 2 during their age of the most important brain formation, they're often spending their days crowded in small spaces in wet diapers watching television. And they may not have adequate toys, adequate supervision, and we're talking about something that's disastrous for the American future. There's no federal regulation of U.S. daycares. There's federal regulation of manicurists and haircutters who need licenses. Daycare has no licensing in the United States. It did under Carter, and that was removed under Reagan. So the 15% of children, the 85% of children have substandard daycare, and 15% have substandard daycare. And so that what we're talking about is, we're talking about people who are an elite group of about 15% of children who are in daycares that cost approximately $25,000 a year. The 85% are in daycares that cost between $5,000 and $8,000 a year. About the tuition for a state college in many states. And so and these daycare payments take up to about 50% of working women's salaries. Those 15% getting quality child care pay at least $25,000 a year for a child in daycare in a quality child care center. At the same time as women are working full-time and sending their children by and large to inadequate child care and after-school care, or no after-school care, actually 72% of kids come home alone after school, starting at 11 years old, and that's when most crimes are committed by children and against children, the hours from the time they get out of school to the time that their parents come home. Well, still, 82% of child care and 70% of housework is still done by women alone after their day. And because of their work at home, married women's work week is 7 hours longer than their husbands, which is quite a few hours. And as a sort of shocking statistic, the average mother whose husband is unemployed still does more child care and more housework than her unemployed husband. This is, you could probably get the hint, trouble is starting for marriage. So the family as we knew it is over. It's done. That sort of necrophile romance that the religious right has with the family, it's strictly necrophilia. Because American men cannot and do not sufficiently support their wives and children. U.S. men feel emasculated, neglected, and miserable. Women are overworked and miserable. And the upshot is that for the first time in American history, the majority of women are single. And they're not just single because their husbands find younger women. 2/3 of divorces now are initiated by women, which is also a novel development. Half of first marriages and 60% of second marriages end in legal separation. And the prediction rate for marriages, the divorce rate of marriages that are happening in the 1990s, is that the divorce rate will be 67% for the first marriages. They're usually greater for the second marriages. And this, of course, doesn't take into account all those people who decide to separate and leave each other without the legal system being involved because they don't have property to worry about. Or all those people who are together, who have children, who are a couple, and then split without a declaration of law. 44% of American kids are now born outside of what we used to think of as a family, mommy, daddy, kids. Women are deserting marriage because the division of labor on which marriage was previously based, which is women performing domestic labor and emotional labor while economically sustained by men, that party is over. And it's interesting that that division never really worked for minorities. Minorities in America never got a family wage. That's why people used to cluck and point, oh, those African American families are so unstable, there must be something wrong. Well, what's wrong is the same thing that's wrong now. If you can't support a family, you're going to have a lot more trouble fitting the usual pattern. So women now are no longer as eager to maintain men's domestic and sexual and emotional lives as a second shift after work. In fact, the mass of women are willing to take a financial hit to escape exploitation from men in the home. U.S. women without children earn as much as men do, or more. And they can and do leave marriages without financial privation. Women with children financially suffer. Having a child in America is the best predictor of poverty at the moment, because alimony payments are rarely paid if they're ever granted. They're rarely collected, and full child support isn't usually collected either, and that was during the good times. Now all of those things are exacerbated. Fathers quite rightly go back to court and say, I can't, I'm employed. And so there's a huge transformation in family life that's happening on the basis of the chart with which you're so familiar. So why do I keep saying class transformation? Well, I guess we could look at the traditional nuclear family as a kind of feudal arrangement. Not feudal in that, they're serfs and tied to the land, but feudal in terms of producing domestic use values that you use, things that you use, and services that you use, like cleanliness, cooked food, and emotional care, and being supported in a place. The man provides the apartment, the vacuum cleaner, like the feudal lord used to provide, the estate, the housing, and so on, and you work. And part of the reason for that previous arrangement was that the male by birthright was to command the domestic labor of women. That was part of the deal about being a man, a deal that a lot of men are kind of sorry to lose. But, and the man, by virtue of his maleness, had the right to distribute, to appropriate this labor. Well, women, that has changed. Women are no longer given the support in what we could call a feudal household. That was the exchange for their constant emotional and domestic and even sexual labor. And so the deal is off. Now, although feudal attitudes still exist in the population, the women's liberation movement did erode the legal basis of men's rights in the household. For example, spousal violence is no longer legally permitted. However, the feudal privilege does live on. The biggest cause of death of women between 15 and 44 is death by husbands and lovers. So, not everybody takes it easily. Yeah?
I was going to say, it actually was permitted at one point?
Yeah, the rule of thumb was you shouldn't beat your wife with a stick bigger than your thumb. And it was legal. You could, if a wife went running to her neighbors, what could they do? And they wouldn't take her in, you know, that because it was legal to discipline your wife. It was also legal to kill your kids. Really, until 1962, children were considered chattel. And what happened is, I mean, it wasn't nice to kill your kids, but if you brought your child dead to the hospital and said, you know, Timmy fell down the stairs, well, they had to accept it. In 1962, the first article by Kemp et al. Came out about the battered child syndrome. And by 1967, there was actually legislation that professionals and hospitals had to ask questions. Before that, whatever suspicions you had, and if you read American literature with that eye, I mean, if you read Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn,